Hello Lana, welcome again for biology lesson, and I hope we are getting you well there at home and that you are practicing the government measures to ensure that you are safer than now. So today again we are going to delve into Form 4 work, and the topic under discussion is actually a continuation of the previous topic or of the previous concept, and that is coordination or repeatability in plants and animals. And today we are actually going to deal with coordination in animals, and our major point of focus shall be on the nervous system. I hope we shall benefit by the end of this session, and therefore I welcome you all. So now, before we continue, we'll have to look at the list of objectives that we need to understand, and that some of the outcomes that we expect to be able to answer by the end of this lesson. So number one, we'll be expected to briefly describe the components of the nervous system in animals. Then number two, name the type of neurons. And then number three, we describe how the neuron is adapted to its function. And I'm sure by the end of the lesson, I'm going to run one of the animation on the structure of the neuron that shall help you to understand more about the neuron and its roles. So in this diagram here that is in the screen, I've given a brief summary of what entails the nervous system. So the nervous system entails two systems, that is the central nervous system that comprises the brain and the spinal cord, and then for today the peripheral nervous system, which comprises the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. Now, what is the nervous system made up of? Number one, we need to note that our brain is very, very significant when it comes to coordination, and therefore it is the first main component of what we call the nervous system. The other component is the spinal cord, then the associated nerves, that is the neurons. So for the central nervous system, it is mainly made up of the brain and then the spinal cord. Remember, the brain is the center for coordination, and the spinal cord controls what we call reflex actions. Now, before we continue forward, I want you to imagine a day that you've been walking by, and then all of a sudden get some prickling thorns onto your feet. How you feel? I'm sure you'll be feeling some pain, and within some period of time, you'll be able not to feel that pain. It will have disappeared. So by the end of this all this topic, I'm sure you'll be able to explain why sometimes you get some pains, especially when you are pricked by some sharp pointed object like the nails, the thorns, as I said, and many, many others. Now, here in this clip here, we have some of the major components that you are going to discuss on here, and are picked on the eye as one of the sense organ, and then we look at it, how it is related on helping us to actually evade some dangerous stimulus. Remember, a stimulus is any component of an environment that directs the change in behavior of an organism. The stimulus could be light, could be gravity, could be pain, could be pressure, etc. So in this case, the eye acts as a sense organ that houses sensory receptors. From the sense organ, that information is picked up by the sensory neuron in a process of what we call sensory input, and then it is taken to the brain for purposes of integration, and then from the brain it processes information, delivers it to the motor output that coordinates or that delivers the impulse or the message to the effector cells. Majorly they are located on the glands, and in our case here it is on the muscle, the lower leg muscles. So we've said that the nervous system is made up of two systems, that is the peripheral and the central nervous system. Now we are going to discuss the first part of it, which is the peripheral nervous system. And remember, the peripheral nervous system is made up of the nerve cells that are innervating or that innervate either the spine or the cranium. So if they are innervating the spine, we call them the spinal nerves. If they innervate the cranium, we call them the cranial nerves. Now, the cranial nerves arise from the brain and they form part of the peripheral nervous system that are associated with the receptors and effectors, mainly in the head. For example, in human beings, there are 12 pairs of the cranial nerves that are confined mainly in the head and the neck. Examples of those nerves are the optic. Remember, these ones are necessary for purposes of light sensation, auditory for balance and sound, facial, and then olfactory that are mainly located in the tongues. But remember, in this topic, we are not going to look at the tongue. We will be looking at the eye, the ear, and then mainly the brain. The other sense organs are going to be discussed later on. For the spinal nerves, these ones innervate the skeletal muscles of the limbs and the trunk. In association with the nerves, they control all the organs of the body below the head. For example, the urinary bladder, the gut, the liver, the kidney, together with the lungs. So, as we mentioned, we are discussing on the peripheral nervous system. That is mainly a constitution of nerves and their roles in the body. So for now, we'll be discussing on the structure, the basic nerve structure. Here is a unit nerve cell, and we're going to look at some of its basic parts. For example, look at how it is modified. We have the nucleus, which controls all the activities of the nerve fiber. And within the nucleus, there are other cells, for example, the Golgi bodies, the ribosomes, and the mitochondrion that provides energy for the movement or for this nerve fiber to perform its function. Then we have the dendrites, which are structures that are branching, that receives an impulse from the surrounding. And then the axon, which is a modification of one of the dendrites that has the Schwann cells, the myelin sheath. Remember, the myelin sheath is modulated or has some fatty layer that insulates the nerve fiber or the axon. Then the Schwann cells here are the ones that secrete the myelin sheath. The knots of Brandwehr are constrictions along the axon that speeds up the rate of nerve impulse. Then at the end there, we have the axon terminals that connect to the other nerve cell through points that we refer to as synapse. So what are some of the basic functions of these parts that we've mentioned? One of the parts that we've said is the dendrite, and its main role is to receive incoming stimuli. The cell body, sometimes we call it the soma, and therefore its main function is to direct impulses from the dendrites all the way to the axon. And the other part, which is very critical, as said earlier, is the control center of the soma, which is the nucleus that tells or commands the soma on what to do. The axon is the pathway for the impulse. That is, the impulses are electrical messages from the soma to the opposite end of the neuron. Then, as I said, myelin sheath's role is to insulate the layer around an axon, and it is done, or it is secreted by groups of cells that we call the Schwann cells. Then lastly are the knots of Brandwehr, which are gaps of constrictions between cells that function as a booster. That is, it propagates and speeds up the rate at which an impulse travels along an axon. So finally, I want us to look at the types of neurons. And we have two ways in which you can categorize the types of neurons. Number one is the direction that they send information, and the other one is the number of dendrites that arises from the cell body. Now, case one, we look at classification based on the direction of the impulse traveling. The first type is the sensory. Sometimes we call it the afferent neuron. Its main role is to pick impulses and send them from the receptor cells or the that can be found in the skin, the eyes, the nose, the tongue, the ears, etc., all the way to the central nervous system. Therefore, their main function is to send impulse towards the central nervous system. The other ones are the motor. Sometimes we refer to them as efferent neurons. Their main function is to send or transmit or conduct information or impulses away, underline the word away, from the central nervous system all the way to the muscles or glands. Remember these two, we refer to them as glands. Then the last one is the interneuron. Sometimes it's referred to as the relay neuron, sometimes called associative neuron, and its main function is to send information between. As the word goes, it relays, and therefore it sends information between sensory neurons and motor neurons. And most of them are actually located in the central nervous system. And for that, most of them do lack what we call myelin sheaths, because we said earlier on that myelin sheaths function is to protect the axon, and therefore lined with a fatty layer that absorbs any shock that can affect the working of the nerve cell. So finally, I want to take some minutes for you to run an animation here that may end up helping you to understand the modification, the function, and how the neuron allows the transmission of a nerve impulse. So I'm going to pause as I run the animation.
Nervous tissue. Structure of the neuron. The neuron is the nerve cell with all its processes. The cell body or the cyton may be fusiform, pyramidal, piriform, or irregularly stellate in shape. It contains a large vesicular nucleus which is centrally located in the cytoplasm of the nerve cell of basophilic material called Nissl substance. Delicate thread-like structures called neurofibrils are present, which are embedded in the axoplasm. The cytoplasmic processes of the neuron are divisible into two types, the axon and the dendrites. A typical neuron has a single axon and many dendrites. The axon arises from the cell body in a conical elevation. Impulses are conducted away from the cell body by the axon. The cell body of the neuron and the dendrites constitute the soma. Neurons may be classified according to the function as afferent, that is sensory, and efferent, that is motor. Afferent neurons conduct impulses from the skin, muscles, tendons, joints, and viscera to the central nervous system. Efferent neurons conduct impulses from the brain and the spinal cord to the effectors. Somatic efferent neurons to the skeletal muscles are excitatory. Visceral efferent neurons to the cardiac muscle may be excitatory or inhibitory. Internuncial or association adjuster neurons transmit impulses from one neuron to another in the central nervous system.